Ahoy hoy, I'm Planet Walk, and a person that a lot of people in my audience will be familiar with is someone known as Ken Wheeler. Now, I have received many comments from Ken Wheeler fans over the years telling me how great Ken Wheeler is, and how actually I'm just too stupid to understand what Ken Wheeler is talking about. Now, I may not be the sharpest tool in the shed, but I have developed a way of being able to look at what someone says and say, hold up, this thing doesn't quite match with reality. Now, if you are a Ken Wheeler fan, please do watch to the end, because I don't think you quite understand how wrong Ken Wheeler is, and how Ken Wheeler is able to sound smart despite being wrong. So this is a video about Ken Wheeler, why people believe what he has to say, and why you shouldn't believe what he has to say. Now, I'm going to start with, how did I find out about Ken Wheeler? Well, it all came down to me searching on Google for thermodynamics. That is a phrase that I coined because flat earthers don't understand thermodynamics and instead use thermodynamics. So the video that I came across was a video titled, "Since Gravity is not a force, but an acceleration and electrical in nature, then what of magnetism?" So I decided to take a look at this video and see what he was going on about. Now, I thought that it might have something to do with Einstein's general theory of relativity, seeing as that says that gravity isn't really a force, but it turns out that it didn't. In fact, it seemed as though Ken Wheeler fundamentally misunderstood Newton's second law of motion.
Acceleration is the complete opposite of a force. Acceleration is way the hell over here, force is way the hell over here. They're complete and total 180-degree opposites, polar opposites.
It seems as though Ken Wheeler does not understand that force is mass times acceleration. Unless the force is acting upon an object, it will not accelerate. In fact, Newton's laws of motion are one of the first things that you'll get taught in a physics class. So that brings me back to the central question of this video. If Ken Wheeler can't understand something as simple and as basic as that, why would anyone take him seriously? So Ken Wheeler talks about quite a few different subjects, the most common being photography and magnetism, but he talks about some others as well, including water, maths, Australia, and Buddhism, I think. Now, those aren't all the subjects that he talks about other things, so he has a varied range of what he talks about, but let's focus on photography and magnetism for a little bit. So when it comes to photography, that is actually something that I can't really criticize Ken for, because I've heard many people vouch for Ken when it comes to his reviews of lenses and cameras. And I'm no photography expert myself, all I know is that a bigger sensor is probably better, and to try and have a well decent lit scene when you're taking photos, or even videos. Yeah, I've only got 2 lights. Oh, never mind, I found another one. Let's put this in and turn it on. Might help if I actually put a bulb in, but we won't worry about that for now. So there are only really 2 things that I can say on Ken Wheeler's expertise on cameras. And the first is that there are people that have expertise in cameras aside from Ken Wheeler. That isn't something bad about Ken Wheeler, just a statement of there are other people aside from Ken Wheeler with expertise. And the second thing is that because there are a lot of flat earthers that watch him, he should probably tell the flat earthers that maybe they shouldn't use the P1000, because yes, it has a good zoom, but it doesn't have a great sensor. In fact, the reason why it has so much zoom is because it has such a tiny sensor. But the thing is, I don't necessarily believe that people think that Ken Wheeler is some kind of expert in magnetism just because he does good camera reviews. There may be a few people like that out there, sure, and if you are one of those people, let me know, prove me wrong. So there must be some kind of other reason why people think that he's an expert on magnetism, and I think that there's actually a rather simple answer for this. So this is an egg, a magnet, and this is a spoon, and look what happens when I put them close together. They stick together like magic. And to a lot of people, magnets do seem like magic. How do you explain to someone why a magnet will be attracted towards metal? To a lot of people, that makes absolutely no sense. So it becomes very easy to make up something about it. So what Ken Wheeler does is he comes along with this explanation for magnetism. An explanation for something that a lot of people really don't understand, except for, of course, scientists who have been studying this their whole lives will understand it. And he uses big fancy words like harmonic incommensurability to try and make people think that he knows what he's talking about. And him using a whole lot of big words actually makes it rather hard to debunk him, because you gotta work out what he's actually saying, and it turns out that he's not saying a lot for the amount of words that he's using. But it doesn't just end there, because he also redefines words, and it turns out that things become a whole lot harder to debunk when the definitions that the person that you are trying to debunk is using are very different to the definitions that you are familiar with. But luckily, Ken Wheeler has provided definitions for what he's actually saying, so we just have to look at the definitions, right? Well, they make less sense than what Ken Wheeler is actually saying. You see, what definitions are supposed to do is they're supposed to explain something in a way that anybody should be able to understand it by reading the definition. Right, I could give you a definition for Marmite, saying that it is a table spread and that it is a dark colour. And as long as you understand what a table spread is, then you'll understand what Marmite is. You may not understand how it tastes, and honestly, the taste is very hard to describe. But if I were to explain Marmite as being, it's just something that's very similar to Vegemite. Now, if you don't know what Vegemite is, you will be no closer to understanding what Marmite is. Now, when it comes to Ken Wheeler's definitions, it's very much like defining Marmite as something similar to Vegemite. And if you don't know what Vegemite is, well, Vegemite can just be whatever makes the most sense to you. Case in point being Ken Wheeler's definition for counter space. What does counter space mean exactly? Well, according to Ken Wheeler, it is counter space, see ether, aether, also accurately called the ether realm, 0-point energy realm, or simply the ether, aether. The realm of pure potential or unmanifest energy by which and from which nothing is possible or even theoretically potential without same. Counter space is the null point opposite to Cartesian forms, masses, magnitudes, and phenomena. There are only two dimensions in nature, spatial and counterspatial, or more accurately, dimensional and non-dimensional. Ether modalities are only so known by the fact they are torsional or circular, dielectric and magnetic. Now, the question I assume everybody is asking right now is, what does that actually mean? And the answer is, whatever you make it out to mean. So what I make that out to mean is an alternate dimension from which all energy comes from. However, it doesn't manifest in reality as any 3D thing, because it has nothing to do with space. Instead, it is everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Now, that's just the meaning that I've given to Ken Wheeler's definition of counter space. And Ken Wheeler fans may disagree. Ken Wheeler fans, if you disagree with my definition, please let me know in language that everybody can understand what counter space means. However, if I am correct about counter space, where is the evidence for this alternate dimension from which all energy arises, eh? Oh, and just as a little aside, I find it rather funny that he uses the term nucleus particle to describe nucleons, like he's never heard the term nucleon before. Oh, and he also spelt electron wrong, instead spelling it election. And he also makes a claim there that because free neutrons decay into protons, that means that only protons exist. Try and wrap your head around that one. Now, I could spend all day going through Ken Wheeler's definitions to try and pass out some kind of framework for reality, and then explaining why there's no evidence. But there are other reasons that I need to get to as to why people believe what Ken Wheeler says. And one of the reasons is people seem to have a very cult-like obsession with Tesla. And I'm talking about the person, not the car company, although there are people with a cult-like obsession of the car company as well. So for some reason, people seem to think that Tesla was right on everything, and that if Tesla said it, then it's the truth.
And I will quote you now, Nikola Tesla, who specifically said, light can be nothing other than a sound wave in the ether. Well, Nikola Tesla was right. Einstein was wrong. It's not my opinion or feeling or belief. It's a fact. You know, the after effect, which is space, and space has no properties, as Nikola Tesla said.
So this may come as a shock to some people, but Tesla was wrong about some things. Most notably, Tesla was wrong about atoms. Tesla didn't think that atoms could be split. But the nuclear bomb exists. Nuclear energy exists as well. Nuclear energy and nuclear bombs only work because atoms can be split because they're made up of smaller things, and sometimes these atoms can become unstable because they might get too big. But the thing is, even if Tesla didn't have some of his crazier ideas, that doesn't mean that he's right about everything. Science isn't decided by one person. It's decided by a whole lot of people making sure that everybody else is correct. You see, in science, nobody is actually idolized. Sure, there are some people which we attribute theories to and laws to, like Newton's laws of motion, Einstein's theory of relativity, but they aren't sacred. If a better explanation for everything comes along, then the old explanation gets replaced by the new explanation, the one that fits more closely with reality. Yet, Ken Wheeler will act like mainstream science is something that is never changing and never challenged, when he's just completely wrong about that. Science is challenged all the time. It is the job of scientists to try and disprove what they think they know to be correct. If you can provide a better model of, let's say, gravity than general relativity, then scientists will challenge that. But if they do find that, hey, it's actually better than general relativity, then it will be accepted. And to be better than general relativity, it would have to make predictions that turn out to be true that general relativity cannot make, or that general relativity gets wrong. But Ken Wheeler doesn't make predictions. Ken Wheeler just says what he thinks to be true. Not what science says is true, not what has been shown to be true, but what he thinks is true. And the last thing that I want to touch on is Ken Wheeler's misrepresentation of science. You see, Ken Wheeler will state what mainstream science says. Kind of. You see, most people don't actually know much about what science says. For example, the bending of light. A lot of people don't really know how light bends. Sure, a lot of people know that when light enters another medium, it will slow down, causing it to bend, but not a lot of people know why it slows down. So when someone comes along and says, well, if light slows down and speeds back up, isn't that breaking the law of conservation of momentum? People will go, well, actually, yes it is, isn't it? However, it is actually very, very complicated. It has to do with things like oscillating electrons, magnetic fields, phase coherency, and it even breaks my brain to try and explain it. So most people get told simplified versions of things to help them understand it, but a simplified version may have a few things that don't quite line up. And so these things can be made to seem absurd. So what Ken Wheeler will do is he will give the simplified explanation, and people will believe that that is the full explanation that mainstream science gives, without realizing that there's actually a lot more to that explanation, but because it's a simplified explanation, it can easily be made to seem absurd. And because mainstream science now seems absurd to you, well, just replace it with what Ken Wheeler is saying, because Ken Wheeler doesn't sound absurd. He's not picking holes in everything that he says. And Ken Wheeler says a lot of words that sound smart. Never mind the fact that he says oxymorons like harmonic incommensurability, where the word harmonic and incommensurable literally mean opposite things. For something to be harmonic, it must be commensurable. You cannot get around that fact. So this is where I'm going to be ending this video. Well, not completely ending it. There's actually a couple of minutes. Stick around. But I will be making a part 2. Part 2 is going to focus less on Ken Wheeler's magnetism stuff and more on how he appeals to certain types of people and how he might be a bit of a con man. But leave a like and subscribe to show that you're interested in that, And if you would like to support me financially, you can do so on Patreon. I'd really love to get a custom-made Ken Wheeler bobblehead to put right there. I don't know, something about that seems really entertaining to me. But anyway, I will see you in the next video. Between you and me, thank you for watching.
The photon idea is an abstraction from misunderstanding the coaxial nature of light, which is a refraction and compression along the dielectric. Yes, and that of course is just a compound ether perturbation modality, because that's all a field is, and I define that in my definition. Counter space. Counter space. Rate of induction. Counter space. Counter space. Counter space. Well, it's the ether. Counter space. Counter space. Harmonic incommensurability.
Harmonic what?
Incommensurability. Not even a single scientist on this earth has ever said quantoid disk model of projected geometry. Not even a single scientist on this earth has ever said harmonic incommensurability. Not even a single scientist on this earth has ever said counter space. Many people believe me, then they would of course be crazy. Of course be crazy. Many people believe me, then they would of course be crazy. Of course be crazy. Many people believe me, then they would of course be crazy. Of course be counter space.
What?
Counter space. Rate of induction. Counter space. Counter space. Counter space. Well, it's the ether. Counter space. Counter space. Well, the photon idea is an abstraction from misunderstanding the coaxial nature of light, which is a refraction and compression along the dielectric. Yes, and that of course is just a compound ether perturbation modality, because that's all a field is, and I define that in my definition. Counter space. Rate of induction. Counter space. Counter space. Counter space. Well, it's the ether. Counter space. Counter space. Counter space.